Let's be honest for a moment. Some of the things destroying your life don't make any noise. They don't knock on your door, they don't blare alarms, they don't flash red lights to warn you. They slip quietly into your smallest habits. The way you check your phone first thing in the morning, the way you tell yourself, just 5 more minutes, the way you smile politely at someone who drains your energy, just because you don't want to seem rude. I once had a patient, a 38-year-old woman who worked in the creative field. She told me, "I don't know why I'm so tired. I haven't done anything wrong." But when we looked closer together, I realized it wasn't any one big thing. It was the little familiar ones. Endless small talk, late night scrolling until 2 a.m., the constant need to please others just to feel accepted. Nothing dramatic, yet every day those things drained a little more of her life force. Until one day, she felt like she didn't even recognize herself anymore. Have you ever felt that way? No accident, no tragedy, just one morning you wake up, completely exhausted, and you can't even explain why. That's the scariest part. The silent destroyers. They pretend to be harmless, but slowly eat away at your spirit, piece by piece. In psychology, we call them slow drainers, things that quietly sap your energy, your passion, your confidence. You don't notice them right away because they seem so normal. A bit of procrastination, a little worry, a constant craving for approval. But together, they pull you further and further away from yourself. And the cruel truth is, the world won't stop to warn you. No one's going to knock on your door and say, "Hey, something's draining the life out of you." You have to notice it yourself. Today, I want you to imagine this. You walk into an old room, dark, dusty, silent. Inside are things you've kept, thinking, maybe I'll need them someday. But they're just taking up space. Your life is like that room, and it's time to clean it out. Quietly, no announcements, no drama. Just the gentle act of letting go of what makes you heavy. Because real change doesn't come from applause or declarations. It comes from that quiet moment when you look at yourself and whisper, "I don't want to live like this anymore." And then you start cutting away, little by little, until you feel lighter, brighter, freer. Don't tell anyone. Let your transformation speak for itself. 1. The comparison poison. I want you to pause for a second and think about this. When was the last time you opened Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok? How did you feel? Maybe you saw someone buying a new house, vacationing in Europe, or showing off a new car. And for just a few seconds, you felt smaller. You thought, why haven't I achieved that yet? What am I doing wrong? I get it. I've heard hundreds of patients say the exact same thing in therapy. And here's the truth. It's not your fault. The human brain is wired to compare. Back in prehistoric times, comparison helped us survive. Who's stronger? Who has more food? But in the modern world, when you're exposed to thousands of carefully curated images every day, that mechanism gets completely distorted. I call it the sweetest poison. You sip it every day, one drop at a time, without even realizing it. And over time, it creates an illusion. The illusion of not having enough. You might have a steady job, a warm home, a good life, and yet you still feel like you're not enough, not successful enough, not beautiful enough. One of my patients, a very successful entrepreneur, once said, "I'm making more money than ever, but every time I open LinkedIn, I feel like a failure." He didn't know that constant comparison was literally lowering his dopamine levels, the hormone that makes us feel satisfied. Over time, it drained his energy and stole joy from the little things that once made him happy. So I want you to imagine this. If you only had one mirror, and in it, you could only see yourself yesterday, how would your life look then? Maybe you'd notice that you've grown, learned something new, become stronger. Maybe you'd feel proud instead of inadequate. Comparison isn't evil, if you compare with the right person. And the only person worth comparing to is who you were yesterday. Because true happiness doesn't come from being better than someone else. It comes from feeling closer to the best version of yourself. 2. The someday syndrome. Let me tell you a true story. One of my former patients, his name was Mark, used to say this every time we talked about change. Someday, I'll fix it. Someday, he'd start working out. Someday, he'd quit the job that was burning him out. Someday, he'd learn to play guitar like he always dreamed. 3 years later, someday still hadn't come. And Mark isn't alone. We all have our own version of someday. The day we'll finally start writing that book. The day we'll apologize. The day we'll finally say, I love you. But in behavioral psychology, we know someday is a very clever lie. Your brain tells you to avoid discomfort. The human brain hates beginnings because beginnings mean risk, effort, and the possibility of failure. So, to protect you from anxiety, it whispers, it's okay, we'll do it later. It sounds reasonable, it feels safe. But in truth, someday is the graveyard of millions of dreams. I once asked Mark, if you don't start today, then when? He smiled sadly and said, when I'm ready. But here's the truth I want you to remember. No one ever feels ready. Readiness comes after you start, not before. If you find yourself stuck in the someday loop, try this, the 2-minute rule. Just start. Write the first 2 sentences of that letter you've been putting off. Clean one drawer instead of the whole room. Walk for 2 minutes instead of planning an hour-long workout. When you take action, you trick your brain. It stops fighting you. And once the wheel starts turning, momentum takes over. There's no someday on the calendar. There's only today. Only now. If you truly want to change, choose to do the smallest thing in the next 2 minutes. Because sometimes those 2 minutes are the line between a life forever postponed and one that finally begins. 3. Fear of judgment. I once had a patient named Sarah, a talented painter who, for 10 years, never showed a single piece of her work. She told me, I'm afraid people will think my art is bad. I'm afraid they'll laugh. And so the years passed while her fear kept her silent. Her paintings locked away in a dark room, unseen by anyone. If you've ever felt like Sarah, let me tell you this. You're not alone. In psychology, we call this social anxiety bias. The tendency to believe people are paying much more attention to you than they actually are. But here's the truth. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think. They're busy thinking about themselves, about their hair, about whether they sounded smart enough, about their own fear of being judged. Think about it. We're all living inside our own little universes, so caught up in how we appear that we rarely have the time or energy to truly focus on anyone else. Yet that fear makes you shrink. You hold back your ideas. You hide your real self. You avoid new experiences, all because of the question, what will people think? But what's the cost of that silence? It's a life designed around fear, instead of around your true values. I often ask my patients one question. If no one was watching you, if no one was judging you, how would you live differently? That question usually stops them cold. Because in that moment, they realize the fear doesn't come from others. It comes from within. Sarah eventually found the courage to hold her first exhibition. She told me that the best part wasn't how many people came to see it. It was the feeling of finally being real. She said, I realized I didn't need applause. I just needed to know that I tried. If you're living under the fear of judgment, remember this. People will always have opinions, whether you act or not. They'll judge when you fail, and they'll judge when you succeed. So why not do the thing that makes you proud? Don't live for applause. Live for authenticity. Because true freedom begins the moment you stop fearing other people's eyes and start looking honestly into your own. 4. Information overload. Picture this. You're sitting in a quiet coffee shop, headphones on, scrolling through your phone. You start a self-help video about how to live a happier life. A few minutes later, you switch to a podcast about self-discipline. Then you read an article titled 5 Habits of Highly Successful People. And you nod to yourself thinking, that's good, I'll start tomorrow. But tomorrow comes, and you play another video. And one day, you realize you're not moving forward even though you know so much. I once met a man like that. He read books every day, listened to hours of podcasts, filled notebooks with quotes, but still said to me, I feel stuck. I don't know where to start. When I asked, have you tried applying any of it? He went silent. That's the illness of our time. Information overload. We live in a world where knowledge is cheaper than ever. Just a few taps and you can know everything. But because of that, your brain starts to drown in input. In psychology, we call it cognitive overload, when you consume too much information without processing it. Your brain interprets action as a threat. It freezes. It chooses to do nothing. See the paradox? The more we learn, the less we act. We've become consumers of knowledge instead of practitioners of wisdom. I often tell my patients, pick one thing and actually do it. You don't need 10 more videos. You just need one small action, done consistently. If you want to be calmer, don't read 5 more books about mindfulness. Just sit quietly for 3 minutes every morning. If you want to live healthier, don't watch 20 new diet vlogs. Just cook one simple meal today. One lived lesson is worth more than 100 lessons stored in your mind. And sometimes what you need isn't more information. It's less noise, so you can finally hear yourself again. Learn less, feel more, do more, because knowledge doesn't change your life. Action does. 5. Clutter. Physical and mental. I remember visiting one of my patients at her home once. She was a brilliant woman, working in communications. But the moment I stepped inside her apartment, I could barely find a place to sit. Clothes draped over chairs, papers covering the desk, boxes piled in the corner labelled to organise later. She gave an awkward smile and said, I know it looks messy. I just haven't had time. As we talked, I realised something. Her home was a mirror of her mind. Inside her head, it was just as chaotic. Unfinished thoughts, unresolved relationships, projects saved for someday. In psychology, we call this mental clutter. And interestingly, a study from UCLA found that people who live in cluttered spaces have significantly higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which means clutter doesn't just affect you emotionally, it literally stresses your body. I've seen it happen many times. When someone cleans a room, something inside them clears too. It's as if tidying up your desk also helps you reorganize your priorities. One of my patients once told me, I started by throwing out things that no longer made me happy. Then I realized I had to do the same with certain relationships, old memories, and outdated fears. She laughed and said, my room felt lighter, and so did I. Have you ever asked yourself, what in your life is taking up space but no longer adds value? Maybe it's not an old shirt, maybe it's an old belief, maybe it's not a dusty box, maybe it's a relationship that's run its course. Decluttering, in truth, is a spiritual act. It's saying, I'm ready to make room for what's new. So don't just clean your house. Clean your mind. Clean your life. Let go of the things that have expired, but you keep holding on to. Because when you clear the clutter, whether from your room or your heart, you rediscover something most people have forgotten: relief. And it's only in that empty space that peace can finally enter. 6. The multitasking illusion. Think back to a recent workday. Did you ever open your laptop, play music, check emails, reply to messages, and then try to get back to your main task? All at the same time? Did you feel so busy, but end the day realizing you didn't actually finish much? I've been there myself, and I've met so many people who live like that. People who believe they're maximizing their time, when really they're just slicing their focus into fragments. Many believe they're good at multitasking, but science says otherwise. A well-known Stanford University study found that people who frequently multitask are 40% less productive, and their memory suffers too. Our brains simply aren't designed to handle two deep cognitive tasks at once. Every time you switch between activities, your brain has to reboot. And that switching process is what drains your energy, your creativity, and your motivation. I had a patient who was a software engineer. He always had at least 10 tabs open on his screen. When I asked him why, he said, "I'm afraid of missing something, so I do everything at once." Ironically, by trying to do everything, he ended up doing nothing well. When he finally tried deep work, turning off notifications, closing all tabs, focusing on one task for 90 minutes, his productivity doubled. He told me, "I realized I didn't need more time. I just needed real focus. Here's the truth. Multitasking doesn't make you better. It makes you emptier. You can't think deeply in a noisy world. So try doing just one thing, but give it your full presence. No phone, no switching tabs, no scrolling while you wait for inspiration. Just you and the work in front of you." When you immerse yourself in one task, you don't just finish faster. You start to feel alive again, grounded in the moment. Because sometimes what we're missing isn't time, it's focus. And once you learn to truly focus, you don't just work better, you begin to live deeper. 7. Overthinking. I remember one late evening, a woman named Linda sat in my office with tears running down her face. She said, "I've been thinking about changing jobs for 2 years, but I still haven't had the courage to send in my resignation. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake." She had a plan so detailed it could have been a blueprint, and yet it was those very details that kept her from ever starting. Maybe you've been like Linda too. You want to do something, write a book, start a business, learn a new skill, but you keep thinking and planning and preparing until the opportunity quietly passes you by. In psychology, we call this analysis paralysis, being frozen by overthinking. The human brain has an interesting mechanism. It believes that if you just think a little more, you can avoid risk. But in reality, the more you think, the more afraid you become, and the less courage you have to act. Your brain doesn't learn through theory, it learns through experience. You can't learn to swim by reading about water. You have to jump in. I often tell my patients, your action doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Because the truth is, action creates feedback, and feedback creates learning. Thinking only creates more questions. Eventually, Linda did send that resignation email. Her hands were shaking, and she nearly cried when she pressed send. But a few weeks later, she told me, "I wish I had done it sooner." I realized the only mistake was waiting. If you're trapped in the cycle of overthinking, I want you to try one small thing. Pick one action, tiny, simple, and do it today. Make the call. Write the first 3 lines. Send the email. Don't wait to feel certain, because certainty never comes. Overthinking steals your time, your energy, and your opportunities. Don't let it convince you that waiting is safe. In truth, waiting is just the quietest way to lose yourself. So act, even if it's just a single shaky step, because life doesn't reward the ones who think the best, but the ones who dare to begin. 8. Energy vampires. I once had a patient named Kevin, a man who was always smiling, always saying yes, and always the one everyone turned to when they needed someone to talk to. But every time our session began, he'd sit down, exhale deeply, and say, "I'm exhausted, not from work, from people." When I asked more, he told me about the friends, colleagues, and even family members who surrounded him. People who constantly complained, vented, and rarely listened. They'd call for hours just to unload their emotions. And Kevin, afraid of disappointing anyone, would always take it. I told him, "You don't have to hate them. You just have to stop letting them drain your energy." We call people like that energy vampires. They're not necessarily bad, but you leave every conversation with them feeling heavier, emptier, and dimmer than before. Now, you might be thinking, but I can't just cut people off completely. And you're right. Sometimes it's family, co-workers, even your partner. But what you can do is set boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls. They're self-respect. They protect your energy while still honoring others. You don't need to say, I'm cutting you out of my life. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Just start gently reducing contact. Reply slower. Decline a few meetups. Use that time instead for the people who make you feel lighter, encouraged, and more like yourself. A Harvard study found that the quality of your relationships directly affects both your happiness and your lifespan. In other words, the people you choose to be around shape your mental and physical health. Kevin started small, spending less time with those who constantly complained and more time with people who radiated positivity. After a few months, he told me, I didn't change anyone. I just changed how much I let them affect me. You can do the same, starting today. No big announcements, no dramatic exits. Just quietly protect your peace. Because your energy is your most valuable currency. And when you learn to guard it, you don't just live longer, you live brighter. 9. Lack of boundaries. I once worked with a woman named Emily, the kind of person everyone described as so kind, so thoughtful. She never upsets anyone. But in our third therapy session, she broke down in tears. She said, I'm so tired. I feel like I've disappeared from my own life. She told me that whenever someone asked for help, no matter how exhausted or busy she was, she always said yes. She stayed late to help co-workers, babysat for her sister, listened to friends vent all night. And in the end, she had no time left for herself. In clinical psychology, we call that self-abandonment, the act of constantly putting others before yourself. When you do that, you send out a dangerous message. I'm less important than everyone else. And over time, you start to believe it. If you've ever felt guilty for saying no, remember this. Refusing isn't selfish. It's self-respect. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're fences that protect what's good within you. One of the exercises I often give my patients is something I call the art of saying no. They start small, declining a call when they're tired, not replying to emails after work hours, saying I can't instead of I'll try. At first, they feel scared, even guilty. But then, something magical happens. They realize they haven't lost anyone's love. In fact, they've gained respect. You see, the people who truly care about you won't leave just because you learned to protect yourself. Only those who are benefiting from your lack of boundaries will be bothered when you set them. And if you're hearing this, maybe it's time to pause and ask yourself, how many times have I said yes to things that hurt me? You don't have to become cold or distant. You just need to learn how to be polite, but firm. A well-placed no can save you from burnout, resentment, and that quiet feeling of being forgotten. Remember, you're not selfish for taking care of yourself. You're simply doing what every healthy adult must do, respecting your own boundaries. And when you do that, you're not only protecting yourself, you're teaching others how to treat you with real love and respect. 10. The victim mindset. I once met a man named Robert. He'd been through a lot. He was laid off, went through a divorce, and had lost touch with his only son. During our first few therapy sessions, he said, I never had a chance. Everything went wrong because of them. My company, my wife, my circumstances. He carried a deep bitterness. But the thing that hurt him most wasn't what had happened. It was the feeling of being powerless. I sat quietly, listening, then asked him one question. Robert, if everything is someone else's fault, what power do you have left to change your life? He went silent for a long time, and for the first time, I saw a small light flicker in his eyes, the light of realization. That's the essence of the victim mindset. It makes you believe life is happening to you, not for you. When you blame circumstances, you might feel temporary relief, because you no longer have to take responsibility. But in that same moment, you hand away your power to change. In therapy, we have a concept called reframing, cognitive restructuring. It's when you shift your question from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "What can I do next?" That simple shift activates different parts of your brain, the areas responsible for creativity and action. It moves you out of the role of victim and into the role of agent. I remember one day, Robert came in with a real smile for the first time. He said, "I can't control the past, but I can write the rest of the story." He started retraining for a new career, exercising regularly, and reached out to reconnect with his son. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because he reclaimed control of his own narrative. I know life can be unfair. There are things we don't choose, don't deserve, and never wanted. But whether we stay trapped in the victim's role, that's up to us. Remember this: you can't change the past, but you can always choose how you respond to it. And the moment you take responsibility for your life, you don't become weaker, you become free. From today on, instead of asking, "Why me?" ask, "What can I do now?" That simple question is the line between someone living in the past and someone finally stepping into their future. 11. The comfort zone trap. I want you to imagine this. You're sitting in a warm, familiar room. Your favorite chair, your morning cup of coffee, your steady job, the same safe conversations. No surprises, no risks. It all feels peaceful, right? But one day you realize you've been sitting in that room for so long that you've forgotten what the cold air outside even feels like. That's the comfort zone. It's like a cozy blanket you don't want to leave on a winter morning. Soft, safe, familiar. But if you keep holding on to it, you'll never get out of bed and truly live your day. In behavioral psychology, there's a concept called optimal discomfort, controlled discomfort. It's the zone where your brain starts learning, adapting, and growing. When you only do what's familiar, your brain goes on autopilot. But when you try something new, speaking in public, starting a project, daring to love again, your brain lights up the regions linked to growth. That flutter of fear, that nervous heartbeat you feel in those moments. That's not danger. That's progress. I once had a patient named Lily who avoided risk at all costs. She turned down promotions because she feared failure. She avoided love because she feared heartbreak. One day, I asked her, "If this fear never goes away, how long will you wait to start living?" She smiled sadly, then decided to try something small, a dance class. 6 months later, she told me, "I've never felt more alive." Not because she became a great dancer, but because she finally stepped out of the little box she'd built around herself. You see, fear isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're transforming. Every time you feel afraid, don't turn away. Take one more step forward. Fear is just a doorway, and everything you truly desire is waiting on the other side of it. The comfort zone might keep you safe, but only outside of it will you truly live. So if something scares you today, smile, because maybe, just maybe, it's the first sign that you're stepping toward the life you were meant to live. 12. Validation addiction. I once worked with a young man named Jason, a gifted designer full of creativity. But every time he posted his work online, he would stare at the screen, waiting for likes. He told me, "If my post only gets a few likes, I feel like I've failed. But when people praise it, I feel like I've won." Sound familiar? Maybe you've done the same, shared a photo, a thought, an idea, and then anxiously wondered what people would think. That's not just a habit, that's validation addiction. In psychology, we know humans are wired to seek approval. Thousands of years ago, being accepted by a tribe could literally mean the difference between survival and exile. But in the modern world, that ancient instinct has been hijacked by social media. Every like, every compliment gives you a little hit of dopamine, the feel-good hormone, like a tiny piece of mental candy. And soon, you start craving more and more of it just to feel enough. One of my patients once said, "I don't know who I am when no one's watching." That sentence stayed with me for a long time. Because when you live for others' approval, you're renting your self-worth. And people rarely pay on time. So I want you to imagine this. If today, no one praised you, no one noticed, no one applauded, would you still do what you're doing? If your answer is yes, that's the sign you're being authentic. We can't completely eliminate our need for recognition. It's human. But we can redirect it. Instead of asking, "Will they like this?" ask, "Is this true to me?" When you do something because it aligns with your values, because it feels right, you stop needing applause. Jason eventually learned that lesson. He stopped counting likes and started spending his time on projects that truly excited him. He told me, "Now, I don't need others to see me to know I'm moving forward." And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. Do what's right, even without an audience. Because real worth doesn't come from the eyes watching you, but from the quiet peace that comes when you know you're living true to who you really are. 13. Doom scrolling. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Have you ever told yourself, "Just 5 more minutes," and then looked up to realize 3 hours had gone by? You know that feeling? Lying in bed, ready to sleep, but your thumb keeps scrolling because just one more video. And before you know it, the sky outside is starting to lighten. I've heard hundreds of patients say the same thing. "I don't understand why I'm so exhausted. I didn't even do anything that hard today." But when I ask about their phone habits, they just give me a sheepish smile. They know they're caught in the loop, the trap we call doom scrolling. It seems harmless, but every swipe is a tiny transaction of your attention. You're trading your time, energy, and focus for a quick hit of stimulation. Science calls this the dopamine loop, the pleasure cycle. Each short video, each notification, each breaking news alert triggers a little burst of dopamine. And when that dopamine drops, your brain craves another hit, so you scroll again and again, until you're stuck in a loop that never ends. A Harvard study found that excessive social media use actually lowers serotonin, the hormone tied to calmness and happiness. No wonder you feel drained, empty, and unable to focus after hours online. That's not laziness, that's mental fatigue. One of my patients once said, "I don't know if I'm really living anymore, or just watching other people live." That line hit me hard, because truthfully, so many of us are doing exactly that, consuming other people's lives instead of creating our own. That's why I often suggest a digital detox. Just 1 day a week without social media. 1 single day. Leave your phone in another room. Go for a walk. Read a real book. Sit quietly without checking for updates. At first, it will feel uncomfortable, even empty, like withdrawal. But gradually, you'll realize the world outside your screen is still beautiful, still peaceful, and you haven't missed anything that truly matters. Time is your most precious currency, and every scroll is a silent expense. Start reclaiming your attention, 1 minute at a time. Because when you stop scrolling through someone else's life, you finally have time to live your own. 14. Half commitments. I once worked with a man named Daniel, intelligent, creative, full of ideas. But he always said, "I'm so busy, yet I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere." When I asked what he was working on, he listed a dozen things: a certification course, a side business, a blog, the gym, guitar lessons, all in progress. So I asked, "Which one are you truly committed to?" He laughed and said, "Honestly, none." That's the trap of half commitments. You do a little bit of everything, but never deep enough to see results. You spread your energy thin, but build nothing solid. And the real exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from doing without clarity. In behavioral psychology, there's a fascinating truth. The brain hates ambiguity. When you haven't fully decided, your mind still has to keep space open for unfinished choices. It quietly drains your energy, like having too many apps open on your phone. The battery dies, but nothing runs well. I call this the burnout of good people. Those who try to do everything, but never truly choose. One of my patients once told me, "I feel guilty quitting, so I keep going even when I've lost interest." I told her, "It's better to stop completely than to continue halfway." Stopping isn't failure. It's a conscious decision. When you commit 100%, you create clarity. No more if, no more maybe. You move forward because you've chosen to. And when you decide to let go, you free the energy that's been stuck in what no longer serves you. Take a moment and look at your life. Is there something you're doing just to get it over with, even though deep down you know it's not right for you anymore? Maybe it's a job, a project, a relationship. If the answer is yes, stop. Be brave enough to choose again. Because half commitments are the shortest road to burnout and the longest road to nowhere. Clarity, whether it means moving forward or stepping away, is where real strength lives. Remember, when you truly choose, the universe moves with you. But when you just say, "I'll try and see," you stay stuck between intention and action. 15. Fear of change. I once had a patient named Martha, a woman in her 40s, stuck in a job she had quietly hated for nearly a decade. She knew she wanted to leave, but every time she imagined starting over, she trembled with fear. She said, "I know I need to change, but what about the bills, the risks, the uncertainty?" I smiled and said, "Martha, do you realize the irony here? You're trading the certainty of your current unhappiness for the uncertainty of possible happiness." She laughed softly, then fell silent for a long time. The truth is, biologically, humans don't like change. Our brains are programmed to interpret anything new as a potential threat. When change appears, whether it's a job, a relationship, or a new environment, the amygdala triggers the fight or flight response. Your body releases cortisol, your heart races, and your mind whispers, "Don't do it. Stay where you are, it's safer." But ironically, that very safety is what keeps you stuck. Change isn't scary because it's bad. It's scary because it's unfamiliar. And everything unfamiliar must be walked through, not avoided. I often tell my patients, no one is ever truly ready for change. You only become ready while you're changing. Martha started small. She didn't quit right away. She learned new skills, reconnected with what made her feel alive. 6 months later, she said, "I'm still scared, but now I know fear doesn't mean stop." We often believe certainty is what keeps us safe, but the truth is, uncertainty is the only constant in life. Everything changes. Our bodies, our emotions, our relationships, our world. Change isn't the enemy. It's the heartbeat of life itself. So if you're afraid of something new, remember, you don't have to be fearless. You just have to move, even while afraid. It's like learning to ride a wave. You can't control it, but you can learn to balance on it. Because only when you dare to step out of familiar waters will you finally discover the wide, open sea of your own life. 16. Toxic perfectionism. I once had a patient named Anna, a successful woman with a stable career and what seemed like a perfect life. But throughout our sessions, she kept saying, "I never feel enough." No matter how much praise she received or how well she performed, she could only see the small flaws, the mistakes she hadn't fixed, the things she could have done better. She didn't realize that her perfectionism was slowly stealing her joy. She wasn't living. She was grading herself. In positive psychology, we understand that perfectionism is actually a defense mechanism. It doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear that if you're not perfect, you won't be loved or respected. It's a clever disguise. On the outside, it looks like discipline and drive, but inside, it's anxiety and exhaustion. I remember asking Anna, if a friend made a mistake, would you stop loving them? She said, "Of course not." I smiled. "Then why can't you offer that same grace to yourself?" She went quiet, deeply quiet. We often treat ourselves by standards we'd never apply to anyone else. We tell ourselves, just a little better, just a little more, believing that eventually we'll feel enough. But the truth is, enough never comes when you're chasing an illusion of perfection. Perfectionism doesn't move you forward. It only makes you afraid to start. And if you notice, the people who create real change in the world aren't the perfect ones. They're the ones who dared to begin while still imperfect. I often remind my patients of a simple phrase, better done than perfect. Instead of asking, is this perfect yet? Ask, did I move forward today? Instead of punishing yourself for a mistake, tell yourself, I'm learning. Because your real worth doesn't come from doing everything right. It comes from your willingness to keep going, even when things aren't. And sometimes it's through the cracks of imperfection that the light of truth and kindness finally finds its way in.